notice that the background and purpose section of your report and the evaluation methods is really an expansion of the required elements of your evaluation plan. So we will talk about using your evaluation plan as a basis for starting your evaluation report. So the first section, an executive summary. Now, this is optional, but we do highly recommend that you have one. This section is a condensed version of your full evaluation report. It should include a brief description of your program, the main research questions, an overview of your evaluation methods, and a summary of key findings and recommendations. It's typically short. Again, it's a condensed version of the full report. And it's typically written after the full report is completed. So even though it's the first section of your report, it's typically written last. So the first major section of the main body of your report is your evaluation purpose and program background. This section serves as the introduction to your evaluation report, and it contains information that provides important context for understanding the evaluation findings. You should assume that people are not familiar with your program and need some sort of background information to be able to really understand the evaluation. So this section should introduce your report by describing the purpose of the evaluation and a brief description of the evaluation approach. It should provide a description of the program and its theory of change. In particular, if you're evaluating one component of your program or a few components of your program, it's important to focus this part of the report on the component that's being evaluated. So it might be that you provide an overview of your entire program, but then you really go into detail describing the particular component that's being evaluated. And then it should also describe prior research and evaluations on the program or similar programs that provide context for this evaluation. So your next chapter in your report is your evaluation methods. This section of the report states the research questions and describes the approach used to answer each question. The section should describe your evaluation design. Is it a process, non-experimental, impact evaluation? The sampling methods, so the methods that you use to either select a sample, to select a sample or define a population that's being included in the study. It should include the size of the sample, the response rates if you do a survey or some form of data collection. What are the data sources that you used and who did you get information from? What type of data collection procedures did you use? Was it a survey or interviews, or did you use existing data? And how did you obtain it? The analysis methods you used for understanding the data, summarizing it, or testing it, and the study limitations and strengths of your design. You may recognize this list because a lot of these elements are required components for an approvable evaluation plan. Now, your evaluation plan, as it goes, usually is submitted through your GARP application, is generally very short. We would recommend that you expand upon the shortened description you have, or the brief description you have of these elements in your plan, but your plan really provides a very good basis from which to develop your evaluation methods section of your final report. Okay. And okay, so after, oh, did we skip a slide? Can we go back one? Oh, no, we didn't. Okay, so after evaluation methods, we have your results. So this section of the report presents the results of the evaluation, and we generally recommend you organize it by research question. When reporting your results, you want to present all the findings, whether they're positive, negative, or there's a null finding, meaning there's no effect. recommend that you describe all results objectively and without interpretation or explanation. As you can imagine, because this is an evaluation of your program, stakeholders have certain wishes, I guess you could say, for the results to turn out one way or another. And so it's very important that the results be presented in a very objective way to ensure that there's no appearance of bias. Also, we recommend that you display and discuss findings by including graphs, tables, and charts, and you use your appendices for the more technical analyses, additional results, or supplemental data analysis. So the final section of your report is your conclusions and recommendations. This should be a discussion of the potential conclusions supported by the findings. So your previous chapter presented the results in a very objective and factual way. So the conclusions and recommendations section is your opportunity to be able to interpret the data. So you want to move beyond just describing your data results and instead talk about, what are the implications of this? What does this mean? Is this good? Is this bad? What does this tell you about your program in relation to the research questions? Again, the focus of your evaluation is always on answering your research questions. So this is the place where you want to answer the question. So if the question is the program effective? You want to answer that. If the question is, what are the processes that are happening across sites? You want to answer that question. And this is the place that you would do it. This section may also include a set of recommendations for next steps for the program or the evaluation. After you've given the interpretation of the findings, then what does that mean for future plans for either your program or the evaluation? You can make recommendations that are specific and supported by the evidence, and you want to ensure that they're feasible, that they're realistic, and that they're actionable. Oftentimes you can have a section also with evaluation recommendations. It might be the case that you've answered a question, but you also have more questions that the study has that have emerged from the analyses. And so you want to describe what those additional questions are and your interest in studying these possibly in the future. Okay, so that is our very brief description of our session. We highly recommend that you go back and look at the pre-recorded presentation to get some additional information on evaluation reporting. I'm now going to hand over the microphone to Kim Nguyen from NORC, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the results from our chat questions.
Thanks, Carrie. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for joining our call today. It's great to see the number of participants, for this session. We've participated in previous symposiums when it was in person. And so it's nice to see that we're able to cast the net a little wider. I'm going to share some of the results from the Getting to Know You questions that Carrie presented at the start of this session. And of those who did to the first one, many have prepared an evaluation report. It wasn't always for CNCS, it could be for another agency. And there's just really a small number that hadn't in the past. We also had some great representation from the State Commission, and they were telling us that they also support the grantees in preparing the report. Do you want me to just go through all of them, Carrie, or do you want to pause for any of them?
Sorry, I was on mute. You mean to have people add to the discussion? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or do you want me to just go through the entire set of questions? We can do that as well.
I think that's fine. We have additional questions for the group to discuss. So why don't you go ahead and summarize the responses, and then we can move on to the other discussion questions.
Sure. So next up, in terms of the types of evaluations, these weren't exclusive to any one particular design. Of those who responded, there tended to be a mix, like process and outcomes or outcomes and impact evaluations. And then there were a few instances where it was just one or the other, or you all were building off of one, such as an outcomes evaluation, and then looking forward to an impact evaluation in the next cycle. There's a mix of responses for whether or not you were working with an evaluator. Some were internal, some were external. And I'm sure part of this is largely tied to your requirements for those that are large grantees. There is an external evaluator requirement, and then there's flexibility for those who are small grantees. And moving down to the last question about who you go to for evaluation related questions, we saw all three of those examples listed: the State Commission, the Portfolio Manager, the Office of Research and Evaluation. And then we also had a few shout outs for NORC, so we really appreciate that. I think that was it though. Any questions? Right, so I'll turn it back to you, Carrie.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for participating. And it looks like we did get some additional questions. So I am trying to present and run through the chat at the same time. So we have some discussion questions. We also received some questions through our discussion board that we wanted to address. And I know that people posted some questions too on the chat. So if for some reason I don't address your question, please speak up and ask about it. So Sarah, what would you recommend? Should we go through the board discussion questions first, or have our discussion questions?
Yeah, let's go through the discussion board questions. I saw there were quite a few good questions posted in there, so thank you to all of you here today who went ahead and did some pre-thinking about questions you'd like to ask. Those are some great questions that I think will be an interesting conversation.
And I wanted to add too that, you know, first of all, thank you so much to all the people who are participating today. It's always nice when you prepare a presentation and people show up. So we really appreciate that. But also at the end of our presentation, we have some resources. If we are not able to answer your question or you don't get to ask your question and get an answer, you can always reach out to us through several ways. We have a TA portal that you can, through which you can put a request to talk with the TA provider. We also have an email address where you can always send us a question. And we're always happy to set up a telephone or Zoom conference with grantees. So you will get a chance to talk to us, whether it's today or through some other means. Okay, so the board questions. So someone asked, can you give an example of a potential timeline for creating a report within the 3-year grant cycle? In your tips at the end, you state that the date of completion of the report must fall within the time frame of the grant cycle, but the data does not need to be collected during that specific time frame. Please explain. So first of all, so during your second or higher grant cycle, you have to complete an evaluation. And our CNCS expects that you will have an evaluation report completed to be able to submit with your next application for your next grant cycle. And so you want to time the completion of your report to be able to submit it with that towards the end of your 3-year grant cycle, but within enough time to be able to submit it with your next application. I hope that's clear. Also, the data does not necessarily have to be collected during that 3-year grant cycle. Sometimes people rely on data that was collected in a previous grant cycle, or well, generally I think that's referring to data that's collected in a previous grant cycle. So the data itself doesn't necessarily have to be collected during the grant cycle that you complete the report in. You can also apply for an extension of the timeline for your evaluation so that it extends into the next 3-year grant cycle. Sarah, I don't know if you had anything you'd add to that, since this is kind of a logistical question.
Sure. And just to clarify a little bit.
Is it nothing scrolling?
Oh, you there, Sarah? Oh, we might have lost Sarah. Okay, well, maybe we'll put that question on hold until Sarah can join us again.
Sorry, folks. This is what happens when you're presenting a workshop. You lose your network, but I'm back. So I don't know what you heard last, but what I wanted to add to what Carrie said is that if you are using data from a previous grant cycle, make sure it's a previous grant cycle for the same project. If you are running multiple grants, either the same intervention in discrete locations or different interventions depending on the grant, make sure that the data that you are using is from the grant cycle that pertains to that same project. Otherwise, I think, Carrie, you can continue. I don't have anything else to add other than what you've already said.
Okay, thanks. And that somebody asked about clarifying that decision about letting that the data doesn't necessarily have to come from the same grant cycle. That's a more recent change, correct, Sarah, within the last few years?
Yeah, it's been clarified. So I'll refer you back to the evaluation FAQs for the details about how to use that.
Great. Okay. So another message board or discussion board question was, as a program which is required to conduct an external evaluation, we are not the writers of the evaluation report. Are you recommending that we are involved in the writing, or should we be using this with our external evaluators and give them an outline of what to include? So we generally recommend that you are involved in managing the evaluation report at both ends of the process. So at the beginning of the report process, we recommend that you provide the evaluator with an overview of CNCS's evaluation report requirements and guidance on what to include in the report. The full slide deck for this session would be a good resource to share with your evaluator. And then once the report has been drafted, we recommend that you review the report just like you would any deliverable that you have hired a consultant to complete for you. You want to ensure that that it not only fulfills the requirements for CNCS, but also accurately and objectively represents your program and fulfills your information needs. So I kind of describe hiring an evaluator like you would hire anyone to do work for you, either for your program, or you might hire somebody to do work on your home. You want to be involved at the beginning to make your goals clear and your requirements clear, and then you want to inspect or review the final product to make sure it's really meeting your needs and fits the specifications that you described. We're not necessarily recommending that you write your own evaluation report, especially if you are required to have an external evaluator. But we do think you should be involved in the process. Okay, so another question is, what should a program that has seen significant disruption to their evaluation due to COVID-19 do in regards to the evaluation report? Now, we get lots of questions like this very recently, as you can imagine, in the last 6 months. This question, they said, for example, an education program that was collecting quantitative data during the past 2 school years and qualitative data this school year, which involved extensive on-site interviews and observation at schools, all on-site work had to be canceled due to school closures, and there is no end of year data for this past school year. Do we just explain this in the report and just submit a report based on the data from the previous school year? What should we do? So again, we get a lot of questions like this. It's more difficult for me to kind of give feedback on that specific a question. I would recommend that the grantee who posted this question, that they submit a request through the TA portal or send us an email, and we can set up a call to talk with them about their specific circumstances. But I can tell you in general, when there's interim findings that'll be available during the current grant cycle, and the interim findings are aligned with the final outcomes to be measured, the grantee should submit these findings in an interim evaluation report when they recompete for funding. There is an AEA approval for you can get an AEA approval, which is only required if the interim evaluation report will not meet the grantee's evaluation requirements. So you can get an extension through an AEA application. Another way of saying this is that an incomplete evaluation, for example, an evaluation with preliminary outcomes that still needs an additional year of data collection, may not completely fulfill the terms of the approved evaluation plan, but it may meet the basic regulatory evaluation requirements. So in that case, you could just submit your report as is. So a grantee so a grantee in that situation could submit an interim evaluation report, and it could satisfy the evaluation requirements. So again, it's hard to speak about specific examples, but if you're missing data, but your evaluation can still meet the requirements for your evaluation, we recommend that you submit a report with the findings that you have. But if in fact you can't complete the evaluation as is and you need more time, you can apply for an AEA extension of that time. And then Sarah, would that be an example where you would submit an implementation report?
Yeah, if you're not able to submit a report that would meet your evaluation requirements as is, then you would need to request the AEA, and then you would submit an implementation report. And the detail, there aren't a lot of details about that in the AEA guidance, but essentially what the AEA guidance says is that the implementation report needs to describe your progress to date in completing the evaluation. So tell us how you're doing, tell us what progress you're making, give us a sense of whether you're on track to complete this in the extended timeline you requested.
Thank you, Sarah. So again, if you have an approved AEA for time due to COVID, then you can submit an implementation report as Sarah described. So those are our questions from the discussion board. I also saw that there was a question asking about the difference between an outcome and an impact evaluation. The main, kind of trying to nutshell, or quickly describe the difference, an impact evaluation has a comparison group. So when we refer to impact evaluations, what we often mean are quasi-experimental or experimental evaluations that have a control or a comparison group. Outcome evaluations tend to refer to what we call non-experimental evaluations, and those are or designs, and those are the ones that do not have a comparison group. You have one study group, and the study group, the people in the study group received the intervention, and you're looking at the differences and how much they've changed since receiving the intervention, but there is no comparison group against which you're comparing those findings. So those were the questions I saw. Did anyone else have any questions in the chat that I missed?
Hey, Carrie, I think we received another question on the discussion board that didn't come our way, but when I was looking it up, but I don't know if we're in the position to answer this. Maybe it would be better for Sarah, but it asks, go over the requirements for a program who has been formula funded at the state level for 10 years and wants to apply for competitive funding for the first time. I am assuming that they are held to the same requirements as previously funded competitive grant applicants.
Hey, this is Sarah. I'm happy to answer that one. No, formula funding does not count toward the evaluation requirements in the same way as competitive funding. The evaluation requirements for formula grantees are set by the state commission. So you need to talk to your state commission about what requirements you might have related to that. In terms of CNCS's own requirements, previous formula funding does not count toward the competitive evaluation requirements. So if a grantee is applying for competitive for the first time, they would be asked to submit a data collection plan, not an evaluation plan, and they wouldn't be required to submit an evaluation report with that application. That being said, as you all know, I think evaluation reports are useful in providing an evidence base for an application, so you're certainly welcome to submit any evaluation reports you have to substantiate what you're proposing in the application.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So some other questions that have come up in the chat. Is there an evaluation requirement for a planning grant? I mean, let's see, during this year, we will develop our evaluation process for our program, but are we supposed to evaluate our planning year too?
This is Sarah. I can speak to that since that's a CNCS requirement. From CNCS's side, if this is a direct planning grant, directly awarded planning grant, no, there is not an evaluation requirement for a planning grant. If what you're talking about is a commission planning grant, that would depend on the commission. You need to follow up with the commission for their requirements. But again, from CNCS's side, the evaluation requirements apply to what we call program grants, grants that enroll and place AmeriCorps members, not planning grants.
Okay. Another question we have is, due to disruptions from COVID, we are extending our data collection for another year. We'll have data from year 1, 2019, but will not have a final report until 2021. If we are applying this current grant cycle, do we need to request an alternative evaluation design? And when do we do this? So, so you have data from year 1, but you won't have your final report until 2021. I think, so if what you're saying is that you won't have fulfilled your evaluation you can't fulfill your evaluation requirement with the data you just have from your first year, then we would recommend that you apply for an AEA. And then when you request an AEA, it's always helpful if you submit it earlier. So if you know you're going to need an AEA, we recommend that you do it sooner. But I believe, Sarah, do they have to submit it with their application at the latest?
If an AEA is being requested outside of the recompete application cycle, we ask that it be submitted outside of the application because we don't review evaluation plans in continuation applications. So there is a mailbox, evaluationplans@cns.gov. That is where alternative evaluation approach requests should be sent, excuse me, if they are being made other than during the recompete application cycle. And I will put that email address in the chat so that you all have it.
Okay, great. And we have another question, a logistical question about the presentation, the taped session. Will that be made available in other locations after the symposium?
I expect so. I actually just put that question out to the organizer team. I am awaiting a response. If I get it in real time, I'll let you know during this workshop. Otherwise, as you know, the recording itself is posted. And yeah, I'll follow up about whether the slides, the PowerPoints, or a PDF version of the slides will be posted.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm kind of going through the questions. We have another question about if we have any tips to make sure an outcome evaluation adds value and is different from performance measurement outcome measurement. Presumably the one is not the same as the other. So what I would recommend is that you submit a request through the TA portal, because I think that in these cases, it's better if we talk to you specifically about your evaluation, the information you have, your performance measurement outcomes, so that we can give you a more specific answer. But what I will say is, in general, we think that, so for a pre-post evaluation, which is what an outcome evaluation is, you don't have a comparison group, but oftentimes it's good to have some point of reference or point of comparison. And so what we mean by that is that if there is a standard or an understanding of performance that is standard and your program is exceeding that, it is beneficial to be able to also provide some type of comparison point against which to compare your findings. So I can give you an example. If you have an academic intervention for reading and your students are making gains pre-post, meaning before the program, their scores, the difference in their scores before the program and after the program, that those gains are larger than what you would typically see for these types of kids. Even if you don't have a comparison group that you collected data on, if there is some existing statistic or point of reference against which you can compare your findings in your final report, that's helpful. So if there's a standard amount of growth that you would see in reading for this particular age group, and you have exceeded it, your students are making larger gains than what a typical student would experience at that grade level with that particular background, then that can be helpful to kind of provide a little bit more reference, I think, or a little bit more information about how your program is doing, more so than just performance measurement. I don't know if the rest of the NORC team have other tips or suggestions.
Yeah, I think you covered it, Carrie. And as you said, it's really program specific, but where possible, we do try to ensure that we draw on the data you've already collected, and this typically comes in the form of performance measures, and see how we can leverage it for an outcome evaluation so that you can build evidence. And a lot of times that means like tracking over time or finding some other way to use your data. But yeah, do feel free to reach out to us through the TA portal, and we can assist you and really make it tailored to your particular program.
Okay. So do other people have other questions about that are maybe either they can be questions about evaluation in general, but in particular around evaluation reporting? Do people have other burning questions that we can answer? Okay.
And folks are doing a great, oh, just a second, Carrie. Folks are doing a great job putting questions into the chat. Thank you for that. If you actually would like to answer a question out loud, you can raise your hand. You'll find that option at the bottom of the participants screen. You should have a raise hand option. So if you'd like to do that, just raise your hand. We'll call on you. You can unmute yourself and feel free to ask a question out loud as well.
I'm sorry, Sarah. I wasn't sure about the logistics.
Not a problem. As long as we're waiting, I will say too that if you have not taken a look at the evaluation FAQs on the CNCS website, please make sure that you do. That last question that Carrie answered was about making sure an outcome evaluation adds value and is different from performance measurement outcomes. There's actually a evaluation FAQ. It happens to be FAQ number 33 that talks about the difference between performance measurement and evaluation and the relationship that they can have between each other. So feel free to use that as a reference as well. This
might be a good segue into another question we have, which is whether people are using the resources that are available around evaluation on the Knowledge Network. Are they submitting requests through the TA portal? Are they using the evidence exchange? And if, if people have either feedback on that, or if there are certain resources they wish were available, or if there's topics we could be covering, we'd really like to hear back from you.
Hey, Carrie, would it be worthwhile to move to the next slide that lists the resources?
Oh, yeah, that's true. Good point. Could we go to the next slide? So some additional resources. So as we mentioned, there's the technical assistance that NORC offers. This is the link to the CNCS TA portal. There's also an email address where you can email us. And we will set you up with either a phone call or a Zoom, or sometimes we can answer your questions by email with our evaluation TA team. There's also CNCS evaluation resources. There's the Knowledge Network that has a number of classes that NORC helped develop a number of those classes on evaluation. Everything from an overview of the evaluation process to how to draft research questions, how to write an evaluation plan, all different kinds of topics that you may find helpful. There's also the evidence exchange, where there's a number of evaluation reports that have been completed by grantees and other resources that can be helpful, the frequently asked questions, etc. And then technical guides are also available. Oh, there's a technical guide. Oh, whoops. Sorry, I did something with my computer. That are related to the Social Innovation Fund on evaluation reporting that you may find helpful. And then there's the AmeriCorps state and national evaluation policies. So has anybody used the resources? Does anybody have any thoughts about additional resources they could use?
Looks like we have a new question in the chat. Question is, could you share tips about how to help a program maintain a schedule throughout their grant cycle so they are well prepared to write their report in the third year of the grant?
Well, so we do actually have an example. We've given this out before, but we have an example of a schedule for completing an evaluation. So much of this depends on the evaluation itself. For instance, whether or not you're relying on existing data or going to do data collection. But I can tell you, we have kind of a general rule of thumb, which is the first year of your grant cycle is typically focused on finalizing your plan. So you wanna line up your evaluator if you're going to hire an external evaluator. You wanna finalize your evaluation plan and gain approval from CNCS. You wanna figure out your data sources. If you are obtaining data from another source, then if you, hold on one second. Sorry, technical difficulties. If you want to obtain data from another source, it's important to establish that relationship. So if you're getting data from the State Department of Education or the local utility company, you want to establish those relationships and make sure you start that process. And then in the second year of your grant cycle, the idea is that that's when you would collect your data. And then so usually, not always, it depends on the program collects data, maybe baseline data in the fall of your second grant cycle. And then in the spring I'm sorry, did I say second grant cycle? Second year. So in the fall of your second year, you would collect your baseline data. And then in the spring of that year, that second year, you would collect your follow-up, for example. And then you would take the remainder of that time, what's left in your second year, and then the beginning of your third year to complete your analysis and reporting. So then you would have a report ready either by the fall of, the beginning of your third year of your grant cycle, or by winter time, depending on if you're a national direct, and depending on the schedule of your state commission for when you need to have your report or have your application in, so that the report is done and can be and can accompany your application for submission. You're welcome. Let's see.
So we only have about 2 more minutes. We do have to wrap up right at 2:50. So NORC team, do you want to make any closing comments, or should we wait and see if there's any additional questions?
Well, I'll just make the quick comment that I made at the beginning, which is that I never want people to feel like they only have a small window through which to obtain support or assistance or have their questions answered. So please always know that you can contact us at any point during your evaluation process through the TA portal or by email, and we're happy to talk with you. So we've talked with grantees who are just at the beginning of their evaluation and they want to talk ideas for their next evaluation. We've spoken to grantees who are towards the end, they've already collected their data and now they just don't know what to do next. And so they contact us. So we're always happy to talk with you at any point during the process and try to answer your questions. Also, occasionally we do get questions that we can't always answer. And so we do have contacts and a lot of support from both the AmeriCorps program and the Office of Research and Evaluation. And so we reach out to them often and can get you answers to your questions if we can't answer them ourselves.
All right, well, we are at 2:50, so I want to say a big thanks to Carrie, Kim, Kristen, and Jenny from the NORC team. Thank you so much for leading this discussion session. And thank you everyone for participating. Thanks for all the great questions.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.